The immune system. I'm going to go over a very, very brief summary of the immune system. Lymphocytes. So cyte means cell. A lymphocyte is a type of white blood cell. When a pathogen invades the body, here are some of the steps that the body takes to get rid of the pathogen. So here are some pathogens over here. First of all, let me back up a second. Pathogen. We have to define pathogen before I go much further. A pathogen is a disease-causing organism. So, for example, could be a virus, could be bacteria. There are plenty of bacteria that are not pathogens that don't cause you any harm, but there are certainly bacteria that can kill you. There are some protists that actually can kill you, that can kill you. Little worms, so those would be animals. So those are pathogens, anything that can cause a disease in you, any living thing that can make you sick. Macrophage. It doesn't say it in the name because there's no site, but this is also a cell. It's a kind of a specialized type of white blood cell. It can eat pathogens and then display the foreign antigens on themselves. So here's the white blood cell, and you can see it's sticking out its cytoplasm. It's pushing out the cytoplasm to try to grab these bacteria, and it's going to engulf them. It's going to eat them. So what I have to do first is define antigen. An antigen is an ID tag. So if you look at any of your cells, the cells are made out of cell membranes, which means, or the outer part here is called a cell membrane, which is made out of a phospholipid bilayer. So that's the phospholipid, and because there's two of them, it's a bi or two layers. And so imagine a whole bunch of these in a row, right? And so this is what your cell membrane looks like, and we've talked about this a little bit before. Embedded in that cell membrane, there are proteins. So here's a protein. Some of the proteins serve as ID tags, and the ID tag might say, hey, I belong to Miss Achin, or hey, I'm a liver cell in Miss Achin. So if a foreign thing comes into me like a bacterium, that's going to have some antigens, some proteins, and sometimes proteins and carbs on them that will say, hey, I'm a bacterium, and these are foreign to me. So that means they're not part of my body. My body recognizes them as foreign, whereas anything on me, hopefully my body is going to recognize all of these tags as saying, hey, that belongs to me. That's Miss Achin. I better not fight that. That's me. So there are two types of antigens. There are foreign antigens and there are self-antigens. Your body should not attack the self-antigens, but your body should attack the foreign antigens. So a macrophage will come around, eat up bacteria or cells that are infected with viruses, and they'll actually display the foreign antigens on themselves. This stimulates the bone marrow to make the right type of lymphocytes to attack a particular pathogen that's invaded the body. So here's an example. These are all white blood cells. They're all types of cells that will attack bad things. If you look at the receptor here, or here, or here, this is the wrong shape and that's the wrong shape. This is the only one that's the right shape for this. So think of this guy as the bad guy, the pathogen, or the bacterium. The pathogen could be a bacterium or whatever. This particular white blood cell will recognize that pathogen and say, hey, this is a bad guy. So this one doesn't have to do anything, and this one doesn't have to do anything. But this one is the right white blood cell. You're going to make lots and lots and lots of these until you find one that has a receptor for the particular bad guy that it has invaded your body. So this lymphocyte's receptors fit the pathogen. They fit together here. You can see them fitting here. This lymphocyte's receptors do not fit the pathogen. So you don't want to make a bunch of those or those right now. You want to attack this stuff. So you're going to make this one in big numbers. So when the right B cell, that's this, it's a type of lymphocyte, is activated, it produces something called a clone of that particular B cell. That means this one didn't have the right receptors, that one didn't have the right receptors, and a bunch of others didn't have the right receptors. Your body made this one, it happens to fit, yay. When it's stimulated, meaning when it finds the pathogen, it will make a bunch of itself and a bunch more of itself. And these things will make this stuff down here called antibodies. So this produces a bunch of cells that make antibodies against that particular pathogen. Not all of the B cells make antibodies. So if you look at this, here's the one you didn't use, here's the one you didn't use. This is the one that was right. It had the right receptors. So you made a bunch of them. Here they are. These are all making antibodies. So these are the B cells that are actively working right now to make you well. They'll make the antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that will do a bunch of things to try to keep you healthy. One thing is that they'll come over and attach to all these bad guys and mark them for another cell to come eat them up. They'll stimulate your immune system, and they'll fight off that particular pathogen. So these antibodies are very specific for the bad guy. Specific for that pathogen only. The thing that's really fantastic though, some of them don't make white blood cells, some of them just hang out. And then here's your second exposure. So you get the flu, you get really sick, you make antibodies, you fight off the flu, and you get all better. Yay! This, though, is still around. And let's say you get exposed to that same flu 2 months later. And you say, you know what, I won't get sick again. I already had that flu this a couple months ago. Or even if it's that same flu years from now, you'll have these around. As soon as the bad guy comes in, you won't have to figure out, your body won't have to do a bunch of iterations to figure out what the right B cell is to make. You already have it around. Here it is. And so you're going to say, ooh, I recognize you. My body's seen this before. It's going to go ahead and make a whole bunch of clones of itself. Some of them will make antibodies. Again, so these are antibodies to fight off the bad guy. And then you'll have some of these, which are called memory cells. So this is a memory cell, memory B cell. And these are also memory B cells. And so the idea is you want to be able to not get sick a second, third, fourth, fifth time. So every time after the first time that your body's seen the pathogen, it should be quick to make the white blood cell. It should be quick to make the antibodies so you don't get sick. So here's your first exposure. It takes time to figure out which white blood cell can attack these pathogens. And during all that time, you're getting sick, you got a fever, you feel lousy. It takes time for you to make the clone. It takes time for you to make the antibodies to go ahead and attack. Hopefully you get all that done before you get really, really, really sick. Second time you're exposed, you've got this memory cell already. You don't have to make more of these. These are floating in your body. If it's been a recent exposure, you've got lots of them floating in your body. So here's the pathogen. Oh gosh, I have the right white blood cell already. Yay, I have the right B cell already. I'm going to make a bunch of clones of myself, make a bunch of antibodies, kill off that pathogen. Gee, I didn't even notice I got sick. I had these pathogens, I had these weapons, these B cells so fast. Yay. Same thing with the second, third, fourth, fifth. Sorry, that was the second. Same thing with the third, fourth, fifth time. So not all of the B cells make antibodies. Some become memory cells that can be easily reactivated if the same pathogen enters the body again. So you really shouldn't get the same pathogen making you sick again. That's not true for everything. Some things like strep do a really good job of fooling the immune system. They get a material that they put on top of their cells, and they can fool your immune system, and it's hard to fight them off. But for most pathogens, you really get it once, and you don't get it again. So here's just a summary of all that. So here's the antigen, which means that's the foreign antigen we're going to assume. So that's the bad guy. So in other words, another name for this would be the pathogen. Make sure you think of this antigen as a foreign antigen, not as a self-antigen. You have tons of self-antigens, which are just fine. Primary response, you've got a whole bunch of B cells that are going to be made, and only one of them will be the right one. So this is the part that takes time, figuring out which B cell can attack that pathogen. So that takes some time. Okay, so these aren't the right ones. This one is. It's activated. It forms this thing called a clone, a bunch more cells. Those cells reproduce, and then you make these antibodies. The antibodies will go back and fight the bad guy. Yay, antibodies. Then you've got this memory cell. The memory cell's around for the second time you encounter the bad guy, and the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time. Notice with the second one, that one's around already. You don't have to spend time. This takes little time. You don't even get sick usually. And not only that, you make a lot more B cells and a lot more memory cells. So the more times you're exposed to the same pathogen, the more memory cells, the more antibodies you'll make. So here are all the antibodies you make the second time. Wow, a lot more than the first time. You don't even get sick with this one. Usually no sick. Yay! Um, and there's more memory cells, so even the third time you definitely shouldn't get sick. So here's the immune response. Here's, let's see, first exposure to an antigen. It might take you 6 days or so. That's what this is, to start making your antibodies to that thing. So here's your primary immune response. The antibodies kind of tail off and you feel better. Okay, so you're better within 2 weeks or so. You start to get kind of sick over here. It takes a while to make your antibodies. Then your antibodies are made and you start to feel better. So then you have fewer antibodies around because the pathogen's killed off. When you have all these antibodies here, you've killed off the pathogen. Let's say you're exposed to that antigen again, right here. So you're exposed to X, that's the first antigen. And these are all the antibodies you make. You make a ton more of them and you make them really, really fast. Look at this, you're making them in almost no time. You don't get sick with that. But if you're exposed to 2 things that day and you've never been exposed to Y before, it's going to take you a while to make the antibodies. They're 2 different diseases. This could be this could be the flu H1N2 or whatever, some certain flu. This could be a totally different flu. Or it could be E. coli, whatever it is. It's some other pathogen. It could be chickenpox, whatever it is. For that one, you're going to have the same response that you did the first time. So this is your first exposure to that bad guy, and this is your second exposure to this bad guy. So you still get sick, but it's not from this one, it's from this one. So this chart shows how your body makes more antibodies and makes them faster the second time you're exposed. First time it takes a while, second time doesn't take long, and boy, you make a lot of antibodies that second time. Mechanism for antibody action. So let's see, here's the bad guy, the antigen, and of course you're going to assume this is a foreign antigen. Self-antigens you should not be fighting. So let's see. So these are what the antibodies actually do. So when you have an antibody, this is your weapon. These are the proteins that you make. When that comes into contact with a foreign antigen, you're going to activate those antibodies in a couple ways. One is called neutralization. These blue things are the antibodies. They go around the pathogen, and now whatever was toxic on the outside of these, let's say right here there's a receptor for getting into your cells. Well, this whole thing's covered with antibodies, so now it's neutralized. This virus now can't invade your cells because the place where it would dock onto your cells is covered up, let's say. This is called agglutination. These are showing you red blood cells, but let's say it's something else, some pathogen. Your antibodies will clump up the bad guys so that a macrophage can come and eat it. And then precipitation, that will take these are the antibodies. This is the bad guy. It'll take the bad guys and make them sort of solid, coming out of your blood, out of your liquid, or out of your cells. And then they're going to be marked for getting eaten. So these things enhance phagocytosis, which means another cell, usually a macrophage, will come and eat them up. Then there's the complement system, which means that antibodies will start a whole bunch of chemical reactions, and those will lead to inflammation. Inflammation is actually, you think of it as a bad thing, but inflammation is good because it brings a bunch of white blood cells to the area, and it'll bring more nutrients to the area so you can fight off the bad guy. And it can also lead to cell lysis, so it can kill the bad guy that's coming into you. So this is all of the different things that antibodies, or many of the different things that antibodies can do to make you healthy. And one of the most important things to remember about antibodies is they are specific. So if you have anti-measles antibodies, those antibodies will not attack chickenpox. And if you have anti-chickenpox antibodies, they're not going to affect the flu this year. And this year's flu antibodies will probably not affect next year's flu antibodies because it's probably a different virus. T cells. So there are B cells and T cells. B cells are a lymphocyte. So if you look at white blood cells, there are a bunch of different white blood cells. There are monocytes and neutrophils and blah, blah, blah. Some of them are called lymphocytes. And one thing that's a little confusing is that white blood cells themselves are leukocytes. So leukocytes, leuko means white, leukocyte is all the white blood cells. Lymphocyte are one type of white blood cells. There are Okay, so there are two types of lymphocytes. There are B cells and there are T cells. And so previously I've been talking about B cells. Now I'm going to start talking about T cells. There are other white blood cells, but they're not specific. They'll just fight off any old pathogen. Lymphocytes are very specific. They fight only one type. So again, B cells that attack measles are going to be different than the B cells that attack this year's flu. Same thing with the T cells. So these two will work together to make you healthy against a specific, I meant to circle that, again, not cross it out, so I'm underlining it, against a specific pathogen. So T cells are another type of lymphocyte. They attack the pathogen directly instead of making antibodies. So B cells tend to make antibodies. So remember B for body. And T cells tend to be more direct. So here's a T cell attacking certain cells. So major types of T cells, there are, I don't know, how much do I want you to know about these? Okay, let's look down here. There are T helper cells. The job of these is to activate B cells. Oops. Activate B cells. I can't. Sorry, I think I pressed a button on my pen. So these activate B cells. These kill, cytotoxic T cells tend to kill cancer. Regulatory T cells tend to calm down the immune system once it's stimulated. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to do with that. Okay, can anti-measles antibodies attack the bacterium that causes tetanus? And the answer there is no. These are super, super specific. So if you remember one thing about the immune system, remember that lymphocytes are specific. They only attack one type of pathogen each. So there's a million different lymphocytes in your body because there's a million different, well, there's B cells and T cells for lymphocytes, but there's a million different types of B cells and a million different types of T cells. They're a little bit different from each other because there's so many different pathogens. What type of blood cell protects you most directly or quickly against a disease the second or third time you come into contact with them? That's memory cells. How do vaccines work? I have not talked about this yet. Whoops. Let's go back and talk about that. So what you do is you take a pathogen that could normally make you very sick, and you take that pathogen and you kill it, or you weaken it. So to weaken it, you might run it through animals like rabbits or something. You might take part of a pathogen, so you might kill the pathogen and take little bits of it, or somehow weaken it. You take that pathogen, you put it in, you do a little bit more than this, but basically what you're doing is taking the killed or weakened pathogen, putting it in a vaccine and injecting it into somebody. What could go wrong? Okay, so when you inject that into someone, what the person's getting are dead or weakened pathogens, but the body doesn't know they're weakened, so the body does an immune response against that pathogen. And when you do that immune response, you make your B cells and you make your T cells. And when you do that, you're making memory cells also. And so now you should have memory cells that are specific to that particular pathogen. So let's say you inject measles, a measles vaccine, into a kid. That kid is getting, let's see, measles is a live virus, so they're getting weakened, but it's a live vaccine, so they're getting weakened measles antigens in them. So vaccine has antigens, foreign antigens, right? So you get your weakened measles antigens, you make an immune response against measles. So you end up making anti-measles antibodies. Those anti-measles antibodies, or anti-measles B cells, T cells, now they should be able to go back and kill, now they should be able to go back and if you actually do get the pathogen, let's say you are exposed to measles, they should go back and kill the pathogen. So you should already have memory cells. So the idea with vaccines is to get you to have an immune response, make memory cells against the particular bad guy you're getting the vaccine against, so that if you're ever exposed to it for real, you'll already have memory cells and you won't get sick. You'll just already have memory cells and you can make your antibodies and fight it off. So there are vaccines against lots and lots of things. In the United States now we get 46 vaccines, I think, by the time we're about 2 or 3 years old. Lots more now than ever before, and they have saved lots and lots of lives, but we really haven't studied them super extensively. So, for example, with the MMR, when they did their test for measles, mumps, and rubella, they didn't test it against, when they did their controlled experiment, um, they tested the MMR. First of all, they never did it together. They tested measles and they tested mumps separately and they tested the rubella vaccine separately. And they tested them against kids with a different vaccine. They don't really take these vaccines and test them against a population of kids who have never gotten a vaccine before. So that's the kind of research that I'd really like to see done for vaccines. So anyway, that's the end of my story for the immune system.